I'm Clara Reed, 27 years old. And until a few weeks ago, I thought I understood what family meant. My grandmother, Margaret Reed, was my anchor, my secret keeper, the only one who truly saw me for who I was. When she passed away, I expected grief, not betrayal. I never imagined being shut out of her will reading by my own relatives. "We've already divided everything," my Aunt Lorraine announced flatly. "You weren't invited for a reason." But when the lawyer frowned and said, "Actually, her name is the only one in the will," the air in the room froze solid. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're tuning in from, and make sure to subscribe, because what happened next is a story about blood, money, and a legacy that tore my family apart. Growing up, my bond with Grandma Margaret was unlike anything else. While everyone around me chased prestige and appearances, she taught me humility and heart. Her home, an ivy-draped estate that had belonged to the Reeds for generations, was grand, but she lived simply, her kitchen always smelling of bread and lavender polish. My Aunt Lorraine, my mother's older sister, crowned herself the family matriarch the moment my grandfather died. She married Gerald Peters, a businessman obsessed with investments and weekend golf, who measured worth in dollars and dinner invitations. Their daughters, Sophie and Claire, wore entitlement like jewelry. "Still buying your clothes at the bargain stores, Clara?" Aunt Lorraine would say at family dinners, swirling her wine. "We should go shopping sometime. People notice, you know." My mother, Helen, never defended me. She was the younger sister who, according to everyone, had married down. My father, Paul, a high school teacher, worked 2 jobs to keep up appearances he never cared about. I watched my mother contort herself to earn her sister's approval, changing her style, her voice, even her opinions, while Grandma Margaret just smiled knowingly and called me into the kitchen. "Come help me with the bread, sweetheart," she'd say, rescuing me from humiliation. In that old kitchen, the one she refused to modernize, she told me stories about love and courage. "I married your grandfather when he was just a bookstore clerk," she said once, her hands dusted in flour. "My parents nearly disowned me. He became successful later, but we were happy even when we had nothing. When I told her I wanted to major in social work, not business or law like everyone else in the family, she beamed. "The world has enough people chasing money," she said, squeezing my hand. "Be one of the few chasing change." Her faith in me never wavered, even when the rest of the family mocked my choices. At 21, during a holiday dinner, Uncle Gerald asked about my plans. "I'm interning at a youth shelter," I said. The laughter that followed was thinly disguised cruelty. "That's adorable," Aunt Lorraine cooed. "But surely you'll move on to something real. No one chooses to be poor." What they didn't know was that Grandma Margaret had been quietly paying my tuition and even donating anonymously to the charities I worked for. "Maybe someday you'll revive the foundation your grandfather and I once dreamed about," she whispered to me once. Years passed, and our bond deepened. I visited her every week, even as my workload grew. We'd sit in her sunroom, tea steaming between us, talking about books, politics, or the stubbornness of hydrangeas. My cousins only visited for selfies and social media posts captioned, "Precious time with Grandma." They resented how close we were. I saw it in their eyes, envy disguised as politeness. They believed I was hoarding her affection, like love with some limited inheritance. By the time I turned 25, I'd become program director at a small nonprofit helping low-income families. The pay was modest, but it felt meaningful. I still went to Grandma's house every Sunday. It was during one of those visits that I first noticed her hands shaking as she poured tea. "Have you seen a doctor lately?" I asked. "Dr. Lewis stops by each month," she said lightly. Just old age catching up to me. But weeks later, I learned the truth. Congestive heart failure. The prognosis was uncertain. Months, maybe a few years. Suddenly, relatives who hadn't visited in ages appeared every weekend with casseroles and fake concern. Aunt Lorraine insisted she move into a proper facility. "I'm perfectly fine in my own home," Grandma said firmly. "Clara's already arranged for a nurse to come daily." Lorraine's smile was venom. "And what medical qualifications do you have, dear niece?" "I'm following her doctor's recommendations," I said evenly. They believe familiar surroundings help her recover. "How convenient," she snapped, "keeping yourself in control of the situation." That was the day I finally spoke up. "This isn't about control, it's about respect. You'd know that if you visited her for something other than appearances." The explosion that followed was nuclear. Lorraine called me manipulative. accused me of using Grandma for financial gain. Uncle Gerald sneered that my charity work was an excuse for laziness. Even my cousins chimed in, claiming I'd turned Grandma against the family. My mother sat silently, as she always did. My father muttered for everyone to calm down. But I'd already seen their truth, a family more concerned with image than love. After that, I was labeled the opportunist. Aunt Lorraine began calling relatives to warn them about me. She even told Grandma's friends I was isolating her for selfish reasons. It worked. People started looking at me differently, and soon a new rule appeared. Visits must be scheduled through Mrs. Lorraine, the nurse told me. Miss Margaret's been tired after your visits. I refused to give up. I called daily instead. Grandma's voice grew weaker, but she always managed a smile in her tone. Then one evening, she said something strange. "Clara, there's a wooden box in the attic. Brass corners, north side. I want you to have it. There's a key inside. Keep it safe. I promise to get it next week." But when I arrived, Uncle Gerald turned me away at the door. "She's too tired for visitors," he said. I tried again and again. Finally, I showed up before dawn, hoping to catch the night nurse. Rachel, the night nurse, looked at me with pity. "She asks about you," she whispered. 15 minutes, but if anyone asks, I never saw you?" I crept upstairs. Grandma was asleep, so I climbed to the attic. The box was exactly where she'd said, small, heavy, the brass corners worn with age. Inside were letters, photographs, and a key tied to a faded blue ribbon. I took it, intending to show her next time, but there was no next time. 2 weeks later, Grandma was gone. I wasn't allowed at the funeral arrangements meeting, nor informed about the will. The news came through a group text from my cousin Claire. "Will reading Thursday, 2 p.m., formal dress. Oops, wrong chat. Wrong chat. Right, I went anyway. She was my grandmother too." That Thursday was unnaturally warm for October, the kind of day Grandma loved. I arrived early, parking my old Honda between Lorraine's Mercedes and Gerald's BMW. Graham, the butler, looked startled when he opened the door. "Miss Clara, I wasn't told you'd attend." "I'm family," I said softly. The foyer fell silent as I entered. Cousins avoided my gaze. My mother shuffled over, whispering, "Lorraine's handling everything. Maybe it's best if I have every right to be here." Lorraine appeared like a storm cloud. "What are you doing here? This is a private gathering." "I'm her granddaughter," I said. "Family?" She laughed sharply. "You manipulated a sick old woman. You were excluded for a reason." "I simply loved her," I said. "That's more than I can say for most people here." Lorraine's mask cracked. "We already divided everything according to her wishes. You were left out." "That's not true." "Please," she sneered. "Your little charity career fooled no one. You expected Grandma to fix your poor life choices." "Lorraine, stop," my mother murmured. "Stay out of this, Helen," she snapped. "You never could control your daughter." The room went dead quiet. Then she called security. A guard approached, eyes apologetic. "Miss, I'll have to ask you to leave." I stood tall despite the tremor in my hands. "Grandma would be ashamed of you all." Outside, I broke down in my car until my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Wait there. Don't leave." Andrew Cole, Margaret Reed's attorney. 5 minutes later, a tall man in a charcoal suit appeared. Silver hair, kind eyes. "Miss Reed," he said, extending his hand. "I represented your grandmother for 20 years. May we talk?" We walked to the garden bench overlooking Grandma's roses. "I must apologize for what happened inside," he said. "Your relatives began an unauthorized reading without me." "They said everything was already divided," I whispered. "That's impossible. Only the executor, me, can conduct it." A flicker of hope stirred in my chest. "Then what now?" He opened a leather folder. "Now we address the real will. But before we go back in there, you should know, your name, Miss Reed, is the only one listed." The words hit like thunder. "What?" I gasped. "That can't be right." "It's exactly right. Your grandmother made her intentions clear." He handed me the document. There it was, in black and white. "I, Margaret Ann Reed, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate to my granddaughter, Clara Elise Reed." I didn't feel my legs as we walked back inside. Andrew moved first, the calm center of a storm I could already hear gathering in the sitting room. Lorraine's face went from triumph to something raw and bitter. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. "We asked her to leave." "And I asked her to return," Andrew said evenly. "As executor of Margaret Reed's last will and testament, I cannot proceed without all relevant parties present." "Relevant?" Gerald echoed, already calculating. "Explain." "It means we are now commencing the only legal reading of Mrs. Reed's will," Andrew replied, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "Whatever you discussed before was premature and carries no weight." Chairs scraped. Eyes flicked to me, then away. I stayed near the doorway, pulse in my throat. Andrew put on his glasses and cleared his throat, and the room shrank to the space between his voice and the document in his hands. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Ann Reed," he began, "dated April 15th of this year, witnessed by myself and Dr. Jonathan Lewis." April 15th. Right after that explosive birthday dinner. After the diagnosis had stopped being an abstraction. Before distributions, he continued, Mrs. Reed included a personal statement to be read in full. Lorraine exhaled sharply. "Is that necessary? We all knew Mother." "As executor," Andrew said, looking over his glasses, "I'm obligated to read the will as written." He read, "To my family gathered here, true wealth is not what we keep, but what we use to lift others. In recent years, I have watched our name become a mirror for status, while the substance of kindness thinned. I have seen love mistaken for weakness and sincerity dismissed as naive. One person among you gave me time without expectation, listened when others performed, and saw me as a woman rather than an inheritance. For that, I have made the following decisions." I felt the room tilt toward me. I stared at the rose-patterned rug and tried to breathe. "I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate," Andrew read, "including the residence, financial assets, investments, and personal property, to my granddaughter, Clara Reed." The explosion was instant. "This is outrageous." Lorraine sprang to her feet. "She manipulated Mother. Everyone knows Margaret's mind was failing." "That cannot be legal," Gerald snapped, color rising. "We will contest. We'll drag this through court until—" Sophie's voice wavered into theatrical sobs. Claire hissed something about betrayal. Distant cousins murmured. My father studied his hands. My mother's eyes shone with tears she wouldn't let fall. Andrew let it crest and break. "If I may continue, there are additional stipulations." The room stalled mid-anger, pivoting to hope. "Mrs. Reed established conditional bequests to other family members through a discretionary trust," he said. "Eligibility is contingent on past and present treatment of Ms. Reed, including but not limited to demonstrated respect, non-interference with her relationship with the decedent, and refraining from disparaging remarks about her character or motives." Gerald laughed without humor. "And who judges that? You? Her?" He flicked his chin at me like I was an intruder in my own name. Reed kept detailed notes, Andrew replied, opening a second folder, "and consulted me regularly." He turned a page. "She also retained Westlake investigations to document several incidents she found concerning." "Private investigators?" Lorraine spat. "My mother spied on us?" "Based on those records, I regret to inform you that at present, no one meets the criteria for distribution." Chaos again, uglier this time. Accusations ricocheted. Someone said brainwashing. Someone else said elder abuse. Andrew answered with dates and receipts. A metronome of facts that turned denials into silence. "On March 10th, he said, checking a page, Mrs. Peters, Lorraine's married name sounded like a verdict, instructed staff to inform Ms. Reed that her grandmother was unavailable, despite Mrs. Reed requesting her. Dr. Lewis's notes from that day indicate Mrs. Reed was lucid and recommended family visits." Lorraine's mouth opened, closed. She needed rest. "Your text that afternoon reads, 'Keep Clara out until we finalize,'" Andrew said calmly. "We have the nurse's reply." Claire's whisper cut across the room, small and mean. "Are we really going to lose everything because of her?" I didn't recognize my own voice when I spoke. "You didn't lose me, you threw me away." Andrew folded the documents and looked at me. "Ms. Reed, your grandmother left a private letter for you. Would you like to receive it now or later?" Every gaze pinned me. "Later," I said, because if I tried to read anything now, I would shatter in front of them all. He nodded. "One more note. The conditional bequests remain available for 1 year from today at Ms. Reed's discretion." Mrs. Reed hoped reconciliation would be possible, but she left the terms of that reconciliation in Clara's hands. In an instant, I became currency. Faces reconfigured. Smiles blinked on like motion-activated lights. The reading concluded in the brittle quiet of calculation. They came at me in waves. "Sweetheart," Lorraine began, sugar over stone. "You must be overwhelmed. Come stay with us a few days. We'll help you sort the legal tangle." "I'm fine at home," I said. Gerald slid in with a banker's smile. "An estate of this size needs stewardship. I can partner on investments." "I'll be careful," I said, giving him nothing. Sophie remembered childhood summers we barely shared. Claire mentioned a charity gala she suddenly thought I'd love. I excused myself toward the foyer like it was a shoreline. "Clara." My mother caught my sleeve and guided me into the old music room. The piano's lid was dusted with neglect. As soon as the door clicked shut, her voice broke. "I'm sorry. I should have defended you. I should have... Why didn't you?" The question had been lodged in my chest for years, sharp and burning. All those dinners, all those comments. She sat on the bench, hands twisting. "I was afraid. After I married your father, Lorraine made my place conditional on compliance. When you chose differently," she blinked hard. "I told myself keeping the peace protected you. It didn't. I failed you." I wanted to hold on to the anger. It had been armor for so long, but her voice was stripped of performance. "I need time," I said. She nodded like a penitent. "I'll give you as much as you need. Just don't shut me out completely." We stepped back into the foyer. Andrew was speaking with Graham, then crossed to me with a small, nondescript envelope. "From your grandmother," he said. "Also, she asked me to tell you the attic box contains background you'll want before making any decisions regarding the trust." I tucked the letter into my bag. "Thank you." Driving home felt like piloting through fog. My phone lit with unknown numbers, then went dark. When I closed my apartment door, the quiet hit like a soft crash. I set the handbag down, went straight to the closet where I'd hidden the box, and carried it to the table. The brass corners were cool against my palms. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. Bundles of letters tied with ribbon, photographs of a young Margaret laughing beside a man who wasn't my grandfather, and the small key she'd told me not to lose. At the bottom lay a slim journal, its spine cracked with use. I unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was graceful, younger. "My dearest M," it began. The story threaded itself from page to page. Her first love, a quiet teacher from a family with no name, forbidden by hers. She had chosen security over that love. Regret rippled through decades in ink. "I married a good man," she'd written later, "but a part of me stayed on the train platform with you. I will not ask Clara to make peace with a life that looks right but feels wrong." Beneath the letters were neat folders labeled in her hand. I opened one and felt my stomach drop. Printed emails, times, dates. Lorraine's messages to the day nurse: limit Clara's access. She agitates mother. Financial discussions ongoing. Another: no unsupervised visits. We can't risk confusion about distribution. I read until the words blurred. It wasn't neglect, it was strategy. A campaign to keep me out while they carved up my grandmother's life like a roast. My phone buzzed. A text from a number Andrew had given me earlier with a meeting time for the next day, and a simple, "I'm here if you need context tonight." I didn't reply. I couldn't yet put any of this into sentences. I made tea the way Grandma taught me and opened the small envelope Andrew had handed over. The paper smelled faintly of lavender sachets and old wood. "My dearest Clara," she'd written in that steady hand that had steadied me my whole life. "If you are reading this, it means I have left you with both a burden and a freedom. I know what I am asking of you. I also know your spine, because it is mine. Do not let resentment make your decisions. Do not let appearances bully you into forgetting who you are. The key in the box opens a drawer in my desk. Inside is the blueprint for the life I could not live. It is not a mandate. It is permission." Tears came then, not the hot shame of the driveway, but the kind that released something you didn't know you were holding. She had seen everything. She had prepared everything. She had believed in me to the very end. The next morning, I sat across from Andrew at his conference table, while he drew the estate in clean, unthreatening lines. The house and grounds, the liquid assets, the portfolio, rebalanced ethically over the last 5 years, he noted, almost proud. The art I never knew was valuable. The minority stakes in 2 small businesses Grandma had helped steady during recessions. Your grandmother was shrewd, he said. She chose simplicity, but managed complexity with care. She also set up the trust I mentioned. The year-long window was important to her. What did she want from them? I asked, knowing the answer and still asking. Not capitulation, he said. Understanding. Change. He paused. She asked me to remind you that forgiveness and access are not synonyms. I carried those words home like a fragile thing. For 2 weeks, I did little but learn. I walked the house with Graham. I met with the gardener who knew the roses by name and temperament. I listened to the staff whose patience had outlasted 3 decades of holiday tempers. I called Dr. Lewis and heard him say, gently, "Your grandmother was lucid. She was also tired of being managed." And then I called the family together. They arrived at the house dressed in composure. The sitting room had never felt more like a stage. I stood where Andrew had stood, the will's cadence hovering in the air like a ghost. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I've thought a lot about what Grandma wanted." Silence gathered, wary and expectant. "I'm going to keep the conditional bequests available as she intended," I said. Relief rippled, too quick. I let it settle before I added, "But there's one more condition." Faces tightened. 500 hours of verified volunteer work with organizations Grandma supported, I said. Over the next year, fewer than 10 hours a week. Schedules are flexible. I'll provide a list. "That is absurd," Lorraine said, mask slipping. "We have responsibilities." "So did she," I said. "This is a choice, not a sentence. Participate or don't. But this is how we honor her values." The room erupted again, the old music turned up. I held my ground, hearing her letter in my head like a hand at my back. When the noise died, only my mother was still in her chair. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Not for the money. For her. For you." I nodded, and for the first time since the reading, a seam of hope stitched itself between grief and whatever comes next. 6 months later, the house no longer echoed with tension. It breathed. The portraits that once watched judgmentally now hung amid laughter, and the steady shuffle of volunteers carrying files, seedlings, and bright ideas. Grandma's estate had turned into the Margaret Reed Foundation, a living thing rather than a frozen shrine. Every transformation began small. The parlor where my cousins used to whisper about handbags became a meeting room lined with corkboards and community maps. The dining room, once set for showy dinners, now hosted monthly forums about housing reform. Even the gardens were different, open to the public on weekends with children running where silence used to reign. I often caught myself pausing beneath the old oak, whispering, "You'd like this, Grandma." The first few months had been trial by fire. Managing the estate was one thing. Managing the emotions attached to it was another. Letters arrived daily, from accountants, charities, even strangers who had once received quiet help from Margaret Reed. Some wrote in shaky penmanship, "Your grandmother paid my medical bills when no one else would." Others sent photos of scholarships, restored homes, smiling families. Each one reminded me that she had always been more than the myth my relatives worshipped. My mother kept her promise. Every Saturday, she volunteered at the literacy center, tutoring adults who'd never finished school. At first, she went out of guilt. Now she went out of joy. "I used to think approval was currency," she said one Sunday over brunch. "Turns out, kindness pays better." My father joined her sometimes, grading papers while she taught. His quiet pride finally unburdened of keeping up appearances. Not everyone followed suit. Lorraine and Gerald launched their lawsuit almost immediately. Their lawyers called it the restoration of family fairness. Andrew called it a waste of ink. The court dismissed it within weeks. Grandma had covered every angle. 3 independent competency assessments, notarized statements, surveillance logs that read like a morality play. When the judgment came down, Lorraine sent a single-line email. "You've divided this family forever." I didn't reply. She was wrong. The family had divided itself long before I inherited anything. The cousins scattered. Sophie moved to another city, claiming distance for healing. Claire tried to soften things with polite texts that ended in subtle requests. Introductions, recommendations, the kind of favors wrapped as reconciliation. I kept boundaries firm but kind. "When you're ready to volunteer," I'd reply, "the foundation always needs hands." The one who surprised me was Taylor, the youngest, the quiet observer at every drama. She showed up at the estate one morning, clutching an email printout about a youth arts nonprofit. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, voice trembling, "but I want to understand what Grandma saw in all this." "Come see for yourself," I said. Weeks passed and she kept returning. She painted murals with children, helped organize art auctions, and somewhere along the way, we started laughing again. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, family began to mean choice, not obligation. One rainy evening, Andrew stopped by with a slim folder. "It's the final audit," he said. "Everything transferred, no loose ends." He paused, studying the bustling volunteers through the window. "Your grandmother would be proud." "I hope so," I said. "Sometimes I still hear her in the halls." "She left one more note for you," he added, handing me a photocopy from her journal. "Use what I gave you to build what I couldn't. Wealth should circulate like blood. If it stops moving, it becomes poison." That night, I sat at the desk she'd once guarded like a command post and read her words again and again until dawn. Then I began sketching plans for something new. The Reed residency program launched that spring, a rotating space in the guest house for artists and activists from disadvantaged backgrounds. They lived, worked, and created on the grounds for 3 months at a time, producing projects that served the wider community. The first resident, a sculptor named Miguel, built an installation in the courtyard from scrap metal shaped into outstretched hands. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "To the woman who taught generosity to breathe." When the piece was unveiled, I saw my mother crying softly in the crowd. "She would have loved this," she whispered. "She does," I said, and for once it didn't sound like wishful thinking. Summer melted into autumn. The anniversary of Grandma's death approached like a shadow I couldn't ignore. Andrew suggested marking it privately. The board suggested a gala. I decided on something in between. A community dinner, free and open to anyone connected to her work. Volunteers, beneficiaries, staff, neighbors. We set long tables across the old ballroom floor, draped them with simple linens, and filled the room with the smell of roasted vegetables and bread, the same scent that had anchored my childhood. People shared stories between courses, how Margaret Reed's anonymous donations had kept a shelter open, how her gentle advice had steered a failing business. Laughter rang against the chandelier glass like music. Near the end, Andrew raised his glass. "To Margaret," he said, voice steady, "who proved that the measure of wealth is the number of lives it touches." "To Margaret," everyone echoed. I looked around the room, my mother chatting with a young teacher she'd mentored, Taylor helping serve dessert, strangers smiling like old friends, and I felt something shift inside me. The ache of loss softened into something else, belonging. Later, when the lights dimmed and the guests trickled out, I stepped into the garden alone. The roses she'd loved brushed against my arm. Above, the sky stretched black and bright, a mirror of every possibility she'd left behind. I thought of the first day I'd been forced out of this house, of crying behind the wheel and believing I'd lost everything. How wrong I'd been. I hadn't lost. I'd inherited a truth that money could only amplify, never create. I whispered into the night, "You were right, Grandma. It's not about what we own." The wind stirred the petals, carrying their scent through the dark, and I imagined her laughter, light and approving. Weeks later, I sat before the camera for the video I'd avoided making since all of it began. The subscribers who'd followed the story deserved an ending, or at least a beginning in disguise. "Hi, everyone," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "It's Clara. A year ago, I thought I'd lost my family. What I really lost were illusions, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me." I told them about the foundation, the residency, the community dinners, about how reconciliation doesn't always mean reunion. If you ever find yourself handed power, money, influence, a platform, remember what my grandmother taught me. Use it like oxygen. Give it away so everyone can breathe. I smiled into the lens. Tell me in the comments, what would you build if you inherited something bigger than yourself? The red recording light blinked off. Outside, the world moved on. Cars passing, laughter from the street, the smell of rain promising growth. For the first time, I felt completely aligned with the legacy I carried. Not a chain, but a compass. The estate was no longer a battleground. It was a garden. And somewhere, in the quiet between heartbeats, I could almost hear her answer, "Keep planting.